You so much, Sarah. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm so honored to be able to talk to you all about really how Black journalists can maintain happiness. As Sarah mentioned, that I'm a happiness scholar, and I'm actually a television reporter, news director turned happiness scholar. And I actually made that transition with seeing some of the things that were happening in the industry and really felt that we needed to address issues to not only in terms of helping in terms of well-being, but to also make sure we're thinking about the level of happiness amongst teams and organizations in the industry. So let's get started. And I will say this, that one thing I really treasured Dr. Harris's presentation, talking about how it's okay not to be okay. And, I'm not sure if you remember when you were children, right? And we would have to go home and the school would give us a permission slip and we would get it signed by a parent. I actually believe sometimes we need that as an adult permission slip in terms of giving ourselves permission to be human, to go through any of the emotions that we need to go through. Within my International Positive Psychology Association community, this is one of the things that were shared. And one of the things I really valued about that is the importance of really the humanness of it all, right? Giving ourselves permission to feel whatever we need to feel. So if you need that permission today, I want you to utilize this slip, because it's just for you. So let me talk a little bit about my research, and then I'm going to go right into what we can do in terms of some coping strategies. So within my research, I've talked to journalists, I've talked to media entrepreneurs, and I really want to share some of the qualitative data, especially as it related to perceptions of work satisfaction amongst journalists. And of course, I've heard things in terms of lacking resources, lacking diversity, burnout. I'm thinking about making a transition out of the industry. But out of all the things that I've heard, I thought that would be really an important point to make tonight is that comment in the middle. And it says, as a reporter, you're never off, right? As a journalist, you're constantly on. And so one of the reasons I mentioned that, because when you're constantly on, you're constantly in motion, it's difficult to even think about, well, how am I going to think about my self-care? Look, when I'm home, Kortni, I'm looking at the news, I'm thinking about my next story, I'm thinking about what I'm going to pitch, I'm maybe even responding to elements as it relates to work. So it's important that we acknowledge that, but also it's important that we talk about what we can do to intentionally practice self-care. I also want to share this, because when we talk about the importance of self-care, it's about looking at, as Sarah was talking about earlier, the dynamic that's happening in the industry. I really love this article that was published by The Hollywood Reporter. And it talked to 10 Black journalists, and in regards to George Floyd, and in terms of coverage, but also in terms of diversity. One of the things that really stood out was the headline alone. When we look at it, I have struggled, right? And so knowing this and understanding this and really unpacking this is important, that we look at it, we evaluate it, but what can we do? What can we do in terms of coping and handling these matters that are going to help maintain our well-being? Within that article, just some highlights. It talked about one journalist experiencing the N-word, another journalist being confused as a hotel maid on a story, which is another element to having to unpack. But I thought really this quote was really another thing that was beneficial. It's been emotionally exhausting, right? Emotionally exhausting, and it's been emotionally draining. And when you get to that point, you really need to start thinking about, okay, what am I going to do in terms of my well-being? How am I going to make sure I protect myself from burnout? And hopefully also think about some proactive strategies where you may not get to that point. I also want to share something on a personal note. So dealing with the level of racial stress. We saw that in the article with, the Hollywood Reporter. I will tell you that it touches me at home. So I'm a former television reporter, news director, now turned happiness scholar, but I'm engaged to a journalist who has been here in the Charlotte market for 21 years, who is a part of NABJ's national board and is constantly working in terms of service and also working as it relates to really serving the community. And of course, you guys know what that role entails. This is something that literally, if you want to talk about something that's breaking news, this is something we talked about last night. And as a couple, can actually encourage me to share it with all of you today. So here he is covering a story as relates to the Confederate statue here in Gaston County. And these are some of the responses that he received on social media. And I'm not going to read them at length. You guys can kind of take a glimpse at some of them. One of the statements says, "I'm a redneck country girl." Yeah, that N word. So obviously imposing, more racial stress. But we see a dynamic here, right? So it's not simply just covering a story, but it's also the dynamics of what one is encountering. And of course, you guys know this in terms of online and also online harassment. So I'm here to tell you that positive psychology can serve you. And it served Ken and I'm going to tell you about a little bit more how we unpacked it as a couple when I talk a little bit about coping with racial stress. But positive psychology can serve you because positive psychology, which is a part of my area of research, deals with really the strength and optimal human functioning that enables individuals and communities to thrive. It's really about human functioning and how we flourish. And what I love about the movement is about sharing more science with a mass audience to really help them have a more, not just a happier life, but a more meaningful life and a fulfilling life. So one of the things that positive psychology does, but what I think is also important to mention, especially on this call, because we're focusing on Black journalists and media professionals, right, are the shared values of African Americans and positive psychology. So many of the strengths recognized in positive psychology, such as optimism, hope, well-being, courage, forgiveness, benevolence, are really emphasized as core values within our community. And these are findings that researchers have found in this area. And I think it's important to share that because one of the elements of positive psychology is not focusing on what's wrong with us, but what's right with us. How are we responding? How are we building resilience? How are we coping? So you're probably saying, well, let's talk about how I can practice self-care. Right? So let's talk about that. What does it look like? How can we continue to unpack this? It's about being intentional. And when I say be intentional, it's about creating a well-being strategy. During our last session that we had, I guess a couple of weeks ago now, it's hard to tell these days with the pandemic. But I talked about the value of a good well-being strategy, what it means for an individual, what it means to an organization. But really, one of the things I want you to walk away with is really understanding the value of thinking proactively about what you can include and what you can use and utilize and kind of pull out of your toolkit, so to speak, in terms of helping you cope and helping you kind of build your approach to your self-care. So the last time I talked about positive relationships, positive emotions, which is all about how do we go about increasing those emotions within certain activities, which we're going to talk about in a moment as well. Self-compassion was another element that was discussed because self-compassion is very important because it will help you understand the value of being kind to yourself. Because also what can happen when we go through stressful situations, we may start blaming ourselves and having this self-critical talk. Self-compassion is all about really being kind to yourself. One of the things I did share, and I know Sarah is working on sharing the video from the last webinar, was the value of really being a friend to yourself, right? How would you treat a friend and what that looks like, and how do you go about that kind of that self-talk and in terms of being a kind of a good bestie to yourself. And then making sure that you are surrounded by, I call it a self-care squad. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we're dealing with coping as it relates to racial stress. So let's talk about it. So proactive coping with racial stress. I will say this, I really valued finding more strategies as it relates to what we can do in terms of coping, especially during this time, by Dr. Monica Williams, who actually infused not only looking at racism and racial stress, but infusing elements of positive psychology as it relates to her coping strategies. What I loved earlier, what Dr. Harris was sharing, I kept on shaking my head and smiling a lot as she was talking, because I was like, yes, she's right. And was that she mentioned limitations, right, in terms of our exposure. She talked about social media. And what Dr. Williams recommends is a limit exposure to racial stress. In this case, you may be signing off of social media. Now that can be a little difficult to do. We just saw one quote talking about how, when I'm a reporter, I'm never off. When I was a reporter, it was very challenging for me. I just, never stopped. But you have to find some time where you have to think about, how am I going to recharge so I can go and to kind of have a better set of eyes. I've always rationalized it like this. I need a good night's rest. No, I need to actually go and listen to what my body's telling me now, and just kind of shut down so I can rejuvenate myself. So begin to think about what that looks like. Maybe it may start with an hour or 2 hours. Maybe start small and see what you can realistically do. But if you're looking at messaging the way that my fiance is looking at messaging, and unfortunately other journalists that are suffering looking at some messaging in terms of online harassment, you do want to limit your exposure. So community was another element that she recommended. She talked about family, friends, professional organizations. One of the things I love so much about being a member of NABJ for all of these, almost 20 years now, being a member of NABJ, is because of the great sense of family and community that we have within the organization and within other professional journalism organizations as well. And also faith-based organizations, right? In terms of being able to find that sense of community. But I want to qualify that, it's really talking about the value of positive relationships. When we have good relationships, that is really a great indicator as relates to our well-being. And I say positive because I think it should be qualified, right? Because you want people that are empathetic, that value active listening, and allow you to be seen. So to go back to the time that Ken and I were processing and talking as a couple as related to these comments, I asked him, I said, when you talk with me about it, I said, because I'm a happiness scholar, I've worked in the industry. I said, do you feel a greater sense of peace, or do you feel a little bit more relief in terms of your well-being unpacking it with me? Or would you feel just as comfortable talking about it with someone who is not in the industry? And one of the things I really valued about what he shared was this. He goes, I enjoy talking about it with you because you understand what my day looks like. So it's great to be able to talk about it with someone who understands my day. He goes, but then I can also be able to unpack it. Someone may not understand my day. He said, but one of the key elements is a person being compassionate. So that's also important to think about, is when you're sharing information, what that looks like and how the person is processing, and really that level of compassion and really that level of empathy. She also suggests spiritual practices, which are also great in terms of really with your well-being. And I know Dr. Harris also kind of shared elements of that as well in her presentation. Another thing that she recommended was seeking distractions. And what I like is how she qualified that. It wasn't about not acknowledging what's happening, but seeking some distractions that are about engaging in positive activities. And so that is what we're going to talk more about today, to kind of arm you with even more tools about some positive activities that you can unpack and start to even more through your toolkit. One of them happens to be gratitude. There's benefits to gratitude. Of course, we've heard a lot about it. I love that Oprah talked a lot about it on her shows, right, in terms of having a gratitude journal. And actually, research supports that. So there's a study that found that a group of healthcare practitioners who kept a gratitude journal for 2 weeks saw a decrease in their perceived stress by 28%, also depression 16%, but it helps also with overall stress in terms of lowering our cortisol levels. And then also it can help, this is one of the reasons why I practice it at night, it can help with sleep quality. But this is another great element for you to think about in terms of self-care, that you can begin to think, okay, how can I go about maintaining levels of my well-being? What can I do to maintain some happiness? I'm going to practice, gratitude and think about what that looks like. And so there's a variety of different gratitude activities, but today we're going to do one together. All right. So this is what I want you guys to do. Feel free if you want to use your cell phone, if you have your iPad, if you have a pen and paper close by, anywhere where you can actually write. I want us to walk through very quickly a gratitude exercise so it can give you even more insight about the principles of gratitude. So this one is about celebrating goodness. And so what I want you to do right now, we need to think of 3 things that went well for you. I'm not going to put a time frame on it. Could have been today. It could have been yesterday. Could have been last week. Think of 3 things that went well for you. I want you to think about what that looked like. I want you to think, why are you choosing that? Meaning, why did it go well? All right, I want you to identify that. And I want you to begin writing it down. I'm going to give you a moment to do that. And while you are unpacking it, I'm going to kind of walk you through kind of the thought process so it can also help you when you're practicing gratitude for things for you to think about. All right, so now you've probably thought about 3 things, and if you didn't, that's okay. If you thought about 1 thing, that's fine. Let's focus in on just that one. All right, now I want you to think about what went well. Then I want you to think about, how did it make you feel? Were you happy? Did it bring you joy? Was there laughter involved? Was it a compassionate gesture from someone? Was it with a stranger? Why are you so grateful for this event? And take a moment. Now, what I want you to do is begin to think about did you tell someone about it? So have you told anyone about this grateful event that you've experienced? If not, and also I respect everyone's privacy. So if you want to share what that grateful event was, right? And I would love for you to do it in the chat section and share what was that grateful event, and also share how it made you feel. I literally had a grateful event before I had my meeting with you guys today. I am addicted to Starbucks. I had to go and grab a coffee. What was wonderful is by the time I got to the counter, the young woman says, "Oh, the guy has already paid for your coffee." So I said, wow, this was beautiful. Small gesture from a stranger who I don't know his name. I barely remember the car anymore. And then, of course, I paid for the person behind me. So it's about feeling that level of gratitude and thinking about really the level of emotions that you've gone through. And so I hope one of the things that you'll keep in mind I know we're limited on time because usually my gratitude activities can be a little long, but I try to be really timely with this, is because I really want to walk you through, opposed to thinking, what am I grateful for? But begin to kind of savor the moment of what that looked like, how you felt, maybe even bringing yourself back there and really being able to experience and celebrate the goodness that you have in your world. So there's one positive activity for you to think about, and it's countless. Believe it or not, there are countless gratitude activities. That just happens to be one. The last time we had the call, I talked about my gratitude jar and how it can also be something that you can include within your family structure, so which is great. I love when I've talked to so many people in the industry that tell me how important gratitude is. And a matter of fact, a friend of mine who's an anchor shared with me how they kind of practice it within their newsroom structure. So gratitude can be a very powerful element for you to really consider and to include within your well-being strategy. Another element is mindfulness, helpful tips. And one of the things research suggests that mindfulness and meditation are really great for personal, interpersonal. They have a variety of different benefits in terms of helping us control emotion, helping us decrease rumination, right? So rumination would be that we're constantly thinking and worrying and going over and over again in our heads, but just slowing us down, it decreases that, improves our memory, which I always believe is great. And then also it really improves our awareness of our thoughts, which is also very beneficial. So something for you to keep in mind in terms of mindfulness. So another positive intervention, of course, we won't have time for us to go over that one today together, but it's something I want you to think about to conclude in terms of your self-care strategy, or well-being strategy, so to speak, is begin to slow down. Notice even when I talked about the gratitude activity, I try to take it into a slow motion, kind of savoring the moment. Of course, letting us kind of think through that. You can do that with other elements of your life. You can eat mindfully, right? You can think about, I'm gonna slow down. When I was reporting, I can recall days I didn't eat at all. And then I can recall days that I just shoved food in my mouth, trying to rush to make sure I got my scripts in. But what you want to do is you want to think about those times that you can really sit down, slow down, savor the moment, and not quickly going through it. Again, it's about kind of giving you that time to be reflective. Sitting mindfully. I love seeing this young man sitting mindfully, right? Thinking about your posture. How are you go about sitting? I'm thinking about as we speak, I'm sitting here talking to you. There's a level of excitement that I'm having talking to you guys, because you notice I wear a smile every time I speak, and I'm looking, because I kind of wear emotion, but I'm being also mindful that I just treasuring the value of the moment. It's about being in the moment. And then also mindful breathing. There's also great breathing exercises that you can find on YouTube that will help you really think about the value of slowing down in terms of even your breath. Other positive activities you think about to include in your strategy, self-guided meditation. I live by it. I tell you, I thought to myself a few months ago, I'm like, wow, I'm not sleeping very well. And I go, oh, I have been doing my self-guided meditation. It really helps, centers me. So I highly recommend identifying self-guided meditation online. Also, of course, Dr. Harris talked about this as well, the value of exercise, movement. There's a great book talking about burnout. And one of the things that the scholars highly recommend is the importance of movement. And that can be in terms of exercise. It could be in terms of dance. It could be in terms of moving around your space. But think about that movement and they call it moving through the stress cycle. Also meaningful experiences. Think about things that you can do with your family that is all about positive activities with them. And I will say this, I won't give you specifics on that, because what I want you to do is I really want you to kind of create your own social experiment and begin to think about what is meaningful to you and what you can construct within your own life or have maybe in the past, and you need to bring it back. right? You need to think about, I haven't done this in a while. Let me bring it back. It was something that really centered me, and it's something that also allowed me to enjoy elements of the people around me. All of these are great ways to really make sure you're maintaining happiness, because as you notice, that part of what I'm sharing is not only understanding the value in terms of valuing positive emotion, but also being able to be present and savor those moments. Also, I want to just reiterate what Dr. Harris said, that help is here. If you're finding that, well, you know what, uh, Dr. Alston, Dr. Kortni, I've done all these things, I'm still not feeling myself. I'm still kind of going through all these different thoughts. Understand that help is here, that professional help, therapy is such an important and really impactful way of treatment. I talk about it freely. I've shared it within, not only talking about it within my TED Talk, but I publicly talk about it a lot because I think it's important as an African American woman and as someone who is a happiness scholar to share how much I value therapy. That when I was a reporter in Philadelphia and I became a widow at 25, and my late husband's death made news, and we were only married 86 days. Guys, my therapist was so key in helping me get through and really helping me being able to deal with so many different dynamics of work, of a newfound status, and then also dealing with not only the loss of him, but at the time my mother was diagnosed with cancer 3 weeks before my wedding to him. So it was a lot that I was dealing with on a job, and a lot that I was dealing with also in my personal life. So I'm going to leave you with this. It's a quote to live by. And it's from Dr. Christian Nith, who's one of the leading scholars as it relates to self-compassion. And she says, having compassion for yourself means you honor and accept your humanness. I hope you honor and accept your humanness and listen to what you need. And don't be afraid to create this social experiment for yourself. Don't be afraid to also incorporate some of these positive interventions, and also be intentional as it relates to creating a well-being strategy. The most important job you have is your health, your well-being.